Do you really think that pretty face and those curves are going to get you out of this, girl? Officer Nathaniel Dean's voice was a rough, poisonous rasp, thick with the sour smell of stale coffee and the heavy weight of unearned superiority. Afternoon sunlight glinted off the barrel of his Glock as he leveled it straight at Avery Lattimore's heart. Click. The sound of the safety coming off was a burning nail driven into the quiet of Willow Creek Estates. Very did not flinch. Her gaze stayed steady, her short white shirt a sharp contrast against the black steel pointed at her chest. "I told you to pay the fine," Dean growled, tightening his finger on the trigger. "Now you're going to jail or something worse." I had no idea that the woman he was threatening was a senior undercover FBI agent, a weapon far more lethal than the one in his hand. What happens when a corrupt cop points a gun at the wrong woman? Where are you watching this from? Hit like and subscribe, because you're about to witness a masterclass in how real justice is delivered. The sound of a Ducati Panigale is not noise. It is a symphony of controlled violence, a deep, guttural baritone that promises explosive power, a sound that belongs on a racetrack, not gliding through the sunny, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek Estates. But for Special Agent Avery Lattimore, that sound was the sound of freedom. For the first time in months, she was no longer living under a false identity. During the undercover operation, her hair had been dyed a reddish brown, her entire personality muted so she could blend into the filth of a human trafficking network in Baltimore. Today, her hair was its natural jet black again, cut into a clean, elegant bob that framed a face of striking symmetrical beauty. Her warm, rich brown skin glowed under the California sun. She was herself again, and she was riding a mechanical masterpiece. She leaned into the curve on Magnolia Drive. The engine purred at low speed. Satisfied, the houses there looked less like homes and more like monuments to success. Sprawling Mediterranean villas and sharp-angled modern mansions, each hidden behind immaculate hedges and ornate iron gates. This was her new neighborhood, the quiet reward after a life lived in the shadows. The Bureau had insisted on a secure location after the Baltimore case ended, with 3 cartel enforcers dead and a price on her head. For the months that followed, she had been on mandatory administrative leave. Her only mission was simple: exist. Avery wore what made her feel human again: black leather riding pants, custom boots that were both tough and elegant, and a simple white short-sleeved shirt buttoned and tied at the waist, leaving a small strip of toned midriff exposed. It was a concession to the heat and a quiet rebellion against the shapeless, oversized clothes she had worn for nearly a year. The motorcycle, the sun, the wind. It was a baptism that washed the grime of the underworld from her skin. She was savoring the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine, when a flash of red and blue in her mirror broke the spell. A patrol car. An old, dented Ford Crown Victoria. It looked completely out of place, a rusted pickup at a Rolls-Royce convention. Willow Creek had its own private security, a discreet force of former military professionals who drove unmarked Teslas. This patrol car was a relic, a predator from another ecosystem. Her senses, sharpened by years of reading danger, went to maximum alert. She noted the faded district number on the trunk and the slight sag in the rear suspension. Her mind, a finely tuned analytical machine, began processing data. The lights flashed. The siren gave a short, irritable whoop. Avery sighed. The feeling of freedom evaporated like morning fog. She signaled and brought the Ducati to a smooth stop against the pristine granite curb. She balanced the bike effortlessly, one boot on the pavement. She did not kill the engine. With the motor running, she still had options. She watched the patrol car in the mirror. The driver's door opened, and a man climbed out. He had the build of a high school football player who had let himself go. His uniform strained over a prominent belly, the short sleeves tight around thick biceps. He wore reflective aviator sunglasses, a cheap performance of authority. He moved with an arrogance that came not from earned confidence, but from aggressive insecurity. This was Officer Nathaniel Dean. Avery did not yet know his name, but she knew his type. She had profiled 100 men exactly like him. They were bullies who craved power because they had none in their own lives. He approached her with a deliberate, unhurried stride, invading her personal space on purpose. He did not look at her face. His eyes went straight to her chest, where the white shirt was stretched tight. He let his gaze linger, a mocking smile on his lips. It was a calculated act of intimidation and objectification. Well, what do we have here?" he said in a low, amused, condescending tone. He hooked his thumbs in his duty belt and puffed out his chest. "Didn't see the sign?" Avery kept her helmet on. Her voice was slightly muffled but clear and even. "There is no sign, officer. I'm a resident here. I live on Oakmont Lane." 2 blocks up. Dean chuckled, a humorless, unpleasant. "Resident. That's funny. I know the residents around here. They don't look like you, and they sure as hell don't ride little toy motorcycles." He pointed at the Ducati with contempt. "This is a quiet family neighborhood. We have a rule. No motorcycles. They disturb the peace." Avery's internal lie detector rang. There was no such rule. She had read every homeowners association bylaw before buying the house. This was a setup, a pretext, not a traffic stop, an attempted shakedown. "With all due respect, officer," she said, her tone inflexible, "that is incorrect. There are no specific vehicle restrictions in the Willow Creek Charter except for commercial trucks." The mocking smile vanished from Dean's face, replaced by a flash of irritation. He was not used to being contradicted, especially not by a woman, and least of all by a black woman, in a neighborhood he considered his personal hunting ground. He stepped even closer. She could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You a lawyer now, or just a know-it-all?" he snapped. "I am the law here, and I say you're breaking it. $200 fine. We can settle it right here, right now, and you can be on your way. Or we can go down to the station, impound this toy, and do a whole lot of paperwork. Your choice, sweetheart." The threat was clear. Pay the bribe, or face a day of manufactured legal hell. He believed he had her cornered. He saw a beautiful woman on an expensive motorcycle, an easy target to intimidate and extort. He did not see the mind behind her eyes, a mind already calculating with precision the statutes he was violating. Coercion, extortion under color of law, and a clear Fourth Amendment violation. He was not just breaking the law, he was building his own prison, word by word. Avery let the silence hang for a moment, allowing him to stew in his own arrogance. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached not for her wallet, but for the chin strap of her helmet. She was about to change the rules of the game. She unbuckled the helmet and removed it in one fluid, practiced motion. She shook her head once, and her black hair settled perfectly around her face. She set the helmet carefully on the seat behind her. Now he could see her face. It was a direct challenge to his worldview. "I'm not paying you $200, officer," Avery said, her voice now clear and sharp, free of any muffling. "Because we both know you just invented that rule. There is no violation. Therefore, there is no fly." There, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement at the patrol car. The passenger door opened, and a younger officer stepped out. He barely looked old enough to be out of the academy, and nervous energy radiated from him. He stayed near the front of the car, one hand hovering uncertainly near his belt. This was the rookie, the backup, the moral witness who would probably do nothing. Avery cataloged him. Officer Miller. Visible badge. Compliant. Conflict averse. The weak link. Dean's face hardened. A wave of anger climbed his thick neck. "You calling me a liar?" he growled, taking another half step forward. He was so close she could see the tiny broken blood vessels in his nose. "That's a bad move. A very bad move. You refusing a lawful order?" "I'm not refusing a lawful order," Avery corrected him in a calm tone, the voice of a surgeon. "I'm refusing to participate in a crime. What you're doing is called extortion. That's a felony. Now, if you want to cite me legitimately for a legitimate violation, please do so. If not, I would like to go home." Every word was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall of logic and law around her, Dean. A man who operated on brute force and bluster had no tools to dismantle it. He only had a hammer, and to him, everything was beginning to look like a nail. "License and registration," he demanded in a guttural voice. He was falling back on the script. The only part of the interaction he knew was legal. "Of course," Avery said. She reached into the small rear bag of the Ducati, moving slowly, hands always visible. She knew any sudden movement could be misinterpreted, or deliberately misinterpreted, as a threat. She produced a small leather wallet, withdrew her driver's license and the motorcycle registration, and held them out. He snatched them from her hand, looked at the license, and froze for a second. "Avery Lattimore, 12 Oakmont Lane." He looked up from the card, eyes narrowed, suspicious. "You just moved in a few days ago, according to this. I don't buy it." He spat the words. "People like you don't just move in here. This is a setup. You're a guest, a worker. Maybe you're here to clean somebody's house." The racism was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was an explicit, ugly declaration. "The house is mine, officer," Avery said, her finite patience beginning to thin. "That's a matter of public record. You're welcome to check." "I don't need to check!" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. The loss of control was accelerating. He was rattled. His simple shakedown had been complicated by a woman who refused to play her assigned role. "You're getting a ticket for the motorcycle, for disturbing the peace, and for that big mouth of yours." "There's no law against having a big mouth, officer," Avery answered. "It's called the First Amendment." That was the breaking point. The calm citation of the Constitution, the serene assertion of her rights, was the spark that ignited a room full of gasoline. This was no longer about money. It was about dominance. It was about putting this woman, this outsider, in her place. He yanked the ticket book from his back pocket and slammed it down on the Ducati's gas tank. The plastic cracked against the painted metal. "Think you're real smart," he sneered. "Let's see how smart you feel when you're in the back of my car." He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I'm at the corner of Magnolia and Pine, detaining a female resisting arrest." "I am not resisting," Avery said clearly, for the benefit of the rookie's body camera, assuming he hadn't and had remembered to turn it on. "I am right here. On what grounds am I being arrested?" "On the grounds that I'm sick of looking at you," Dean snarled. He dropped the ticket book and reached for his handcuffs. That was when Avery acted. Not an attack. Not a flight. A calculated action designed for a future courtroom. She slipped her hand into the pocket of her riding pants and pulled out her phone. She raised it, thumb sliding to activate the camera. "For my protection, officer," she said calmly. "I am recording this interaction." The escalation in Dean's behavior was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of semi-professionalism, already cracked, shattered completely. The bully was replaced by a predator. No. No, you're not. His eyes were wide with fury. The idea of a permanent digital record of his behavior, a record he could not control or erase, was an existential threat. He lunged, not at the phone, but at her. His left hand shot out and clamped around her wrist with crushing force. His right hand went to his belt. In that fraction of a second, Avery's training took over. Her mind became a whirlwind of tactical calculations. Primary aggressor, emotionally compromised, physically bulky. Secondary officer, passive, but potentially variable. Open residential terrain with possible witnesses. Objective, de-escalate if possible, but prepare for extreme measures. She could break his grip a dozen ways. A wrist twist, a strike to the radial nerve. She could incapacitate him in under 3 seconds. But this was not a Baltimore alley. This was a suburban street in America. The rules of engagement were different. Using force, even in self-defense, would muddy the narrative. It would give him the story he wanted, the violent suspect who attacked an officer. Discipline, she told herself. Discipline is a weapon. She let him hold her wrist, while her body remained relaxed, non-threatening. "You are assaulting me, officer," she said, lowering her voice into a tone of absolute command that momentarily startled him. "I'm just getting started," he snarled, his face contorted with rage. He tried to rip the phone from her other hand. She held it firmly. The tug-of-war lasted only a second. He was stronger, but frustration was making him careless. He could not get the phone. Then he made the fatal mistake that would end his career. "Drop the phone!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic and fury. "I will not," Avery answered. Her eyes locked on his. He released her wrist. His hand flew to the holster on his hip. The sound of the snap coming open was startlingly loud in the quiet afternoon. He drew his Glock 19 with a speed that showed practice, but with an intention that showed pure malice. He did not point it at the sky. He did not point it at the ground. With a trembling hand, he aimed it directly at the center of her chest, directly at her heart. "I told you," he repeated, his voice shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and rage, "to drop the goddamn phone." The world seemed to slow. The birds stopped singing. The soft breeze died. Avery could see everything with exceptional clarity. The sweat beading on Dean's upper lip, the slight tremor in the finger on the trigger, the pale, terrified face of Officer Miller in the background, who now looked as if he might vomit. A window opened in a house across the street. A face appeared. A witness. Another phone came out. Good. Avery looked down the barrel of the gun. She had taken enemy fire more times than she could count. She had faced cartel sicarios with AK-47s and Chechen mobsters with sawed-off shotguns. But this was different. This was a man who was supposed to enforce the law, using the color of his authority as a license to kill over a traffic stop he had invented, and a phone he did not want. Recording him, she held his gaze. She did not beg. She did not cry. She did not show the fear he so desperately wanted to see. Instead, a flash of something cold and dangerous entered her eyes. It was the look of a predator recognizing a lesser, stupider predator. He might have the gun, but she had the power. He simply did not know it yet. With the Glock still pointed at her chest, she slowly and deliberately lowered the phone and let it drop to the pavement. It landed with a soft sound. She had her recording. She had her witnesses. Now it was time to let him complete the chain of evidence. The sound of the phone hitting the pavement seemed to break the spell. Officer Miller, the rookie, finally found his voice. "Chad, Jesus Christ, put it away!" he shouted, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, one hand extended. "Put the gun down, man!" Dean looked at his partner, then at Avery. The adrenaline was still flooding him, but a flicker of survival instinct must have cut through the red haze of his rage. He lowered the Glock, hand still trembling, and holstered it with an awkward, clumsy motion. But the damage was already done. He had crossed a line with no return. He had escalated a verbal dispute to the threat of lethal force. Under the law, and more importantly, under the eyes of the FBI, he had just committed a capital offense. He stared at Avery, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his temples. He expected her to be a sobbing, terrified mess. Instead, she stood completely still, her expression one of cold, analytical calm. The fact that she was not broken seemed to rekindle his fury. "Look what you made me do," he hissed, as if it were her fault. He grabbed her arms and twisted them behind her back with unnecessary force. "You're under arrest. Assault on an officer. Resisting. Threatening a felony." He was manufacturing charges, trying to build a legal fortress around his own criminal acts. The steel handcuffs dug into Avery's wrists. He cinched them down until they were painfully tight, deliberately cutting off circulation. It was another petty act of cruelty, another charge to add to the growing list in her file. "Do it, kid," Avery said. Not to Dean, but to the rookie Miller, who was now close. Hands. "Follow your orders. Make sure the record is complete." Her voice was almost instructional, as if she were a training officer speaking to a cadet. Dean shoved her toward the Crown Victoria. The shove was violent, intended to make her stumble and fall. But Avery had a low center of gravity and perfect balance. She moved with the force of the push, turning it into a series of controlled steps that brought her to the side of the patrol car. She saw her reflection in the hot glass of the rear window. She saw the faces of her neighbors watching in horror from their windows and perfect lawns. She saw at least 3 smartphones pointed at her, their tiny red recording lights glowing like distant, vengeful stars. She met the eyes of a woman, a blonde in tennis clothes. Avery gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Witness," the nod said. "Don't look away. You're going away for a long time," Dean whispered in her ear as he patted her down roughly, his hands lingering inappropriately. "Think you can come into my town and disrespect me? This town is mine." He found nothing in her pockets. He ripped the rear bag from the Ducati and threw it onto the hood of his cruiser. He found her wallet, her keys, and a tube of lip balm. No weapons, no drugs. Nothing that justified his wild escalation. "Where's the ID?" he demanded, giving her a slight shake. "The one I already showed you is in the wallet you're holding," Avery answered in a monotone completely devoid of emotion. He shoved her into the back seat. The plastic cage was cramped and stiflingly hot. It smelled of stale vomit and cheap air freshener. The door slammed shut with a grim, final sound. Avery sat up on the hard plastic seat. Her wrists ached. Her Ducati, her beautiful symbol of freedom, sat abandoned at the side of the road. But her mind was a whirlwind of cold, clear thought. She was no longer a resident on administrative leave. Dean climbed into the driver's seat and looked at her through the metal mesh with a triumphant grimace. "Buckle up, princess," he said, gunning the engine with a roar. "Next stop is the 4th Precinct. Welcome to the system." As the patrol car pulled away from the curb with a squeal of tires, leaving behind the pristine serenity of Willow Creek, Avery closed her eyes for a moment. She was not praying. She was consulting a mental file, a detailed dossier she had been required to study before her relocation. It was a threat assessment of the local Greenfield Police Department, prepared by the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. The report specifically flagged the 4th Precinct for an unusually high number of citizen complaints, a pattern of racial discrimination, and credible, though unproven, allegations of corruption. The name at the top of that file, the man identified as the nexus of the precinct's decay, was Lieutenant Garrett Vance. And the officer with the most complaints for excessive force under Vance's command was a patrolman named Nathaniel Dean. It was not a coincidence that he had found her. It was inevitable. The interior of the Crown Victoria was a mobile microcosm of the precinct's decay. The upholstery was torn, the radio crackled with static, and the air smelled of cheap fast food and unwashed polyester. Avery remained motionless, her posture impeccable, despite the handcuffs digging into the nerves of her wrists. Her gaze was fixed on the back of Officer Dean's neck. She was a profiler in full operation, observing, cataloging, analyzing his aggressive driving as he rode the bumper of other cars, the way he constantly checked his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Not for safety, and to admire the flush on his face, the nervous tick in his jaw. He was high on a cocktail of adrenaline, power, and racial animosity. "Did you see her face, kid?" Dean asked Miller, slamming the heel of his hand against the steering wheel. "Just staring at me. No tears. Thinks she's tough. We'll see how tough she is after a night in the tank with the junkies." Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. He risked a glance at Avery through the partition. He looked sick. "Chad, you pointed a gun at her," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. "Over a motorcycle and a phone. The use of force report is going to be a nightmare." "There's no nightmare," Dean snapped, irritated. "She made a threatening gesture. She refused to drop what I perceived as a weapon. I feared for my life. End of story. Write your report the same as mine. That's the us against them playbook, Miller. Learn it." Avery listened, memorizing every word. "I feared for my life." The classic, pathetic excuse of the who uses his badge as a shield for his own aggression. It was a lie that had been written into thousands of reports to justify thousands of abuses. But this time, it would not work. This time, there were videos. "Officer Miller," Avery said. Her calm, clear voice cut through the tension in the car like a scalpel. Both men jumped. "Don't talk, prisoner," Dean snarled, glaring at her in the rear view. Avery ignored him completely, focusing entirely on the rookie. "Officer Miller, I want you to note this moment. Note that your partner is instructing you to falsify an official report, which constitutes conspiracy to obstruct justice, a federal crime. You are currently an accessory to aggravated assault and a violation of federal civil rights under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code." "What the hell?" Dean laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Listen to her. Now she's a damn lawyer. Watch too much TV, lady. You're a street thug who got caught." "No," Avery said, dropping her voice to an icy calm. "I am the woman who is going to end your career, and if he keeps following your illegal orders, his as well." Dean slammed on the brakes at a red light, stopping hard on purpose, so Avery was thrown forward. The hard plastic of the partition slammed into her shoulder. A sharp, intense pain shot down her arm, but she made no sound. She used every ounce of her inner strength to keep her expression unchanged. Dean watched her in the mirror, waiting for a reaction, a cry of pain. He got nothing but that unsettling, steady stare. "Oops," he mocked. "You have a decision to make, Officer Miller," Avery continued relentlessly. "You can be an accessory to Mr. Dean's litany of crimes, or you can be a witness for the prosecution. I suggest you choose carefully. Your entire future depends on it." Miller looked down at his lap. He was visibly trembling. He looked like a cornered animal, torn between the predator behind the wheel and the strangely powerful woman in the cage. He said nothing. "Cowardice is a choice," Avery said quietly. The words carried more disappointment than anger. The rest of the ride was silent, but thick with palpable tension. The pristine avenues of Willow Creek gave way to commercial sprawl, and then to the neglected, abandoned streets of the 4th District. Avery watched the city change through the window. She saw the peeling paint, the boarded-up shops, the people on the corners who looked at the patrol car not with respect, but with a mixture of fear and resentment. This was the community Dean and his colleagues were paid to protect. It was clear who they considered the enemy. As they pulled into the precinct parking lot, Avery glanced at her watch. It was an elegant, discreet, tactical piece, a gift from the FBI director. It looked like a simple digital watch, but it contained a GPS transponder and a covert emergency beacon. She had not activated it. Not yet. She wanted to see the inside of the beast. She wanted to meet the man in charge, Lieutenant Vance. She wanted to give them every opportunity to hang themselves, to create a chain of evidence so long and so solid that it would drag their entire corrupt enterprise into the abyss. "Home sweet home," Dean said, parking in a reserved spot near the rear entrance. He killed the engine. "Last chance, Miller," Avery said quietly. "Once these doors open, the timeline locks. You become part of the conspiracy." Miller looked at her with pleading eyes. "I have a family," he whispered. "And so do the people you harass," Avery answered. Dean yanked the rear door open and dragged her out by the arm. The pain in her bruised shoulder was intense, but she walked with her head high, her bearing proud and defiant. He shoved her toward the double steel doors of the precinct's rear entrance. The doors hissed open, and the cool, antiseptic air of the station washed over her. It smelled of industrial cleaner, stale coffee, and institutional despair. Avery took a deep breath. The hunter had just entered the lion's den, chained and unarmed, but she allowed herself a small, hidden smile. The lions had no idea they were already in her trap. The booking area of the 4th Precinct was a monument to bureaucratic neglect. Fluorescent lights hummed and flickered overhead, casting a sickly green glow over peeling paint and worn linoleum floors. A drunk was passed out in a plastic chair, snoring loudly. The air was a nauseating mix of pine cleaner, body odor, and misery. It was a place designed to strip a person of identity and dignity, reducing them to a simple case number. Officer Dean shoved Avery toward the high booking counter with a theatrical flourish. Behind the scratched plexiglass sat a desk sergeant, who looked as if he had been part of the original foundation of the building. He was a disheveled man, with a permanent scowl and a uniform shirt stained with food. His name tag read O'Connell. He looked up from a crossword puzzle with an expression of profound boredom. "What is this, Dean?" O'Connell growled, without even looking at Avery. "Another stray dog?" "This one's special," Dean announced, grabbing Avery's arm and forcing her to face the desk. "Thinks she's a resident of Willow Creek. Gave me a hard time. Assaulted me when I tried to write her a ticket." O'Connell finally looked at Avery. He took in her expensive riding pants, her elegant haircut, her beautiful face, and her defiant gaze. He let out a wet, wheezing chuckle. "Willow Creek. Yeah, right. And I'm a movie star. What was she really doing? Checking out houses? Probably." Dean shrugged, refused to cooperate, resisted the whole way. Avery remained silent. She let them build their narrative. Every lie was another nail in their coffin. O'Connell took one of her hands and slammed it down on the dirty counter to take her prints. "Name," he muttered, thick fingers on a sticky keyboard. "Lattimore," she answered in a clear, firm voice. "Avery." "Address?" he asked with a mocking tone. 12 Oakmont Lane, Willow Creek," she answered without hesitation. O'Connell snorted and looked at Dean with amusement. He started typing. "I'm not putting a fixed address," he said more to Dean than to her. Makes the paperwork easier. Transient, I figure. You are deliberately falsifying a government document, Avery said in a conversational but firm tone. That is a crime. I suggest you write the address I gave you. Dean gave her a shove in the back of the head. I told you to shut up in the car. Want to spend the night in isolation? Keep talking. They moved her to the height chart for the mugshot. She stood perfectly straight. Posture flawless. She looked directly into the camera. Her expression was not one of shame or fear, but of deep disappointment, as if the camera itself had personally let her down. The flash went off. The profile photo clearly captured the swollen bruises Dean's grip had left on her wrist. More evidence. Prints, Dean ordered. Avery was led to the digital fingerprint scanner. She placed her fingers on the glass. When the green light swept across her prints, the machine emitted a loud beep. On O'Connell's monitor, a large red window suddenly opened. Error. Restricted file. Level 5. Clearance flag on file. Do not detain. Do not process. Contact FBI Washington Field Office immediately. O'Connell stared at the screen, mouth open. What the hell is this? He muttered, squinting at the warning. Level 5 machines glitching again. Damn budget cuts. He hit the escape key, but the warning box would not close. It pulsed with an insistent rhythm. Dean leaned over the counter, annoyed. What's the problem? System's frozen, O'Connell said, thumping the side of the monitor with his fist. Restricted file. FBI warning. Junk hardware. It's not the hardware, Avery said quietly. Shut up, Dean snapped, a flicker of genuine uncertainty in his eyes. He was a bully, not a genius. Anything that deviated from his simple intimidation script made him nervous. Just override it. Book her as a Jane Doe. We need to get her in a cell. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The casual cruelty was now mixed with a threat of confusion. O'Connell managed to close the warning window by rebooting the terminal. While it slowly came back to life, Dean made his next move, an act of pure vindictive spite. I think she's hiding something, he announced to O'Connell, loud enough for everyone to hear. I felt something on her waist during the pat-down. Could be drugs. We need a strip search. Officer safety. The room went silent. Even the drunk in the corner stopped snoring. Officer Miller, who had been hovering near the entrance like a guilty ghost, took a hesitant step forward. Chad, a strip search? Miller's voice was weak, ready to be accused of disorderly conduct. Protocol says that's only for serious narcotics or weapons felonies. We don't have probable cause. I am the probable cause, Dean lied smoothly, his eyes distant. I felt something. That's all I... You questioning my judgment, Miller? You want to be the one who explains to the lieutenant why an officer got stabbed because you were too scared to follow procedure? Avery looked at Dean and understood the tactic perfectly. This was not about safety. It was about humiliation. I do not consent to a strip search, she declared in an authoritative voice. You have no legal justification. This violates my Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches. Your rights ended when you put your hands on me, Dean said with contempt. Get in the room. He pointed to a small windowless room next to the booking area. Avery considered her options. She was no longer handcuffed. She could fight. She could drop Dean and Miller before O'Connell even got out of his chair. But violence would only validate their false narrative. It would turn her into the dangerous animal they wanted her to be. The final victory was not in winning the physical fight, but in letting them destroy themselves with their own corruption. She had to endure. She had to be the rock they crashed against. She walked into the search room. She removed her boots, placing them carefully side by side. She unbuttoned her shirt and folded it despite the dirt from the struggle. She unzipped her leather pants. While she stood there, Dean entered the room. A female officer named Peterson stood awkwardly behind him, looking deeply uncomfortable. Dean stopped. He stared. Avery's body was a map of a violent life. A pale, irregular scar ran across her ribcage, a souvenir from a knife fight with a Russian arms dealer. A circular, puckered scar on her thigh marked the entry point of a bullet from a warehouse assault in Detroit. A faint trail of burned scars marked her back from an explosion in a meth lab. These were not the marks of a common criminal. They were the scars of a warrior. Dean swallowed hard. The expression of smug detachment on his face faded, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. He saw the scars, then looked at her face, at the cold, unbreakable fire in her eyes. There was a story written on her skin in a language he could not read, but he could feel its terrifying weight. "She's clean," he muttered, turning away sharply. The bluster had evaporated. He had deflated like a cheap balloon. Get her dressed. Put her in a cell, back at the booking counter. Avery dressed with slow, deliberate movements. She buttoned her shirt and tucked it in. She felt a small victory. He had tried to humiliate her and had ended up unnerved. "I have the right to a phone call," she said in a calm, firm voice as she finished tying her boots. "Payphone on the wall," O'Connell growled, jerking his thumb, eyes already back on the crossword. The computer had finally come back online, and he had simply logged her as Jane Doe as instructed. "Call your lawyer. Tell him to bring cash. Bail for assaulting a cop is going to be high." Avery walked to the battered public phone. The receiver was greasy and smelled of age. She picked it up. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call a bondsman. She did not call a friend. She dialed a 10-digit number that connected her to an encrypted, secure switchboard deep inside the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C. It rang once. A female voice, crisp and professional, answered. "Command Center. Authorization Sierra Tango Niner," Avery said. Her voice changed, losing any trace of civilian softness. It became the sharp, precise voice of a federal agent in the field. "Identify user, Agent Lattimore." There was a half-second pause on the line, the sound of keys typing. The operator's tone changed instantly from professional to urgent. Voice print confirmed. "Good afternoon, Agent Lattimore. We were not expecting this channel to be active. What is your status?" "Code Black," Avery said. The two words floated in the dirty air of the precinct like a death sentence. "Hostile domestic detention facility. 4th Precinct, Greenfield Police Department. Officer involved. Badge number 714. Officer Dean. I am unarmed and in custody." "Code Black confirmed. Agent, are you in immediate danger?" "Negative on life threat," Avery answered, looking at Dean, who was watching her with a mocking, curious expression. "Positive on imminent and ongoing civil rights violations. Activate surveillance protocol. I want full cyber penetration of this facility's network, and I want the hostage rescue team. Tell them to bring the big truck. Estimated time of arrival for advanced team is 9 minutes. HRT is 20 minutes out from Fort Wynne. We are tracking your beacon. Stay on the line, Agent. The cavalry is coming." Avery hung up the phone. She turned. Dean was leaning against the desk, arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. "Who was that?" he asked. "Your pimp? Your dealer? Tell him you'll be a little late tonight." Avery stared at him. For the first time since the encounter, she allowed herself a small, cold smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a grandmaster who has just driven her opponent's king into an inescapable trap. "I called my boss," she said. Dean laughed. "What, Starbucks missing a barista? Tell them you won't be making any more frappuccinos tonight." "Something like that," Avery said quietly. "Cell 4, Dean ordered O'Connell, boredom returning. "Let her sit in the dark for a while. Maybe she'll learn some respect. They walked her down a short, filthy hallway to the cells. The heavy steel door closed with a deafening clang. Avery sat on the cold metal bench. The cell was dark and smelled of urine. She closed her eyes and folded her hands in her lap. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a forward observer, calling in a precision airstrike on her own position. And the pilot's name was Justice. The cell was a cage of cold concrete and even colder steel. The air was damp and stagnant. Across the narrow hallway, a man in another cell moaned softly in a drunken sleep. Avery ignored him. She sat on the bench without leaning against the dirty wall, maintaining an upright posture. She was conducting a tactical assessment of the precinct based on her walk from the booking counter. 2 visible exits. 1 security camera in the main hallway was poorly positioned, with a clear blind spot near the source. Desk Sergeant O'Connell was lazy and easily distracted. Officer Dean was a predictable, emotionally volatile aggressor. Officer Miller was the weak link, vulnerable. Lieutenant Vance was the invisible head of the snake. She began a breathing exercise, a technique taught at Quantico to maintain focus and lower heart rate in high-stress situations. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. Her mind became a quiet, silent space in the middle of the misery. She was preparing for the next phase of the operation. Heavy footsteps approached down the hallway. Officer Dean appeared in front of her cell, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. He leaned against the bars and took a long, noisy sip. He was enjoying his power, savoring his victory. "You know," he said in a familiar tone, "I checked the address you gave me. 12 Oakmont Lane. Big place. Sold for $3.5 million last month to a shell corporation out of Delaware." He shook his head, a smug smile on his face. "So I don't think you're the owner. I think you're a house sitter. Or maybe the maid who decided to take the fancy motorcycle out for a spin while the real owners are in Europe." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm getting warmer." Avery opened her eyes. They were clear and sharp. "If you enter that property without a federal warrant," she said in a low, calm voice, "you will trigger a silent alarm that will alert the nearest FBI team in under 5 minutes. By the time you figure out how to turn off the porch light, you will be looking down the barrels of a dozen M4 carbines." Dean laughed, a harsh bark. "FBI, you still on that? You're delusional, sweetheart. You've seen too many movies." He opened the cell door with a loud clang. "Come on. The lieutenant wants to talk to you. He's curious about the secret agent before we book you." Avery stood and walked out of the cell with fluid, controlled movements. She walked ahead of Dean down the hallway to a small, windowless room at the back of the precinct. The interrogation room was a cliché of institutional intimidation. Beige concrete block walls, a single metal table bolted to the floor, and a large 2-way mirror on one wall. Dean shoved her into a metal chair and cuffed one wrist to a steel ring welded to the table. "There," he said, sitting across from her. "Now we can chat nice and quiet." He slid a pre-printed form across the table. "Here's the deal. It's an extension. You admit you were driving recklessly. You plead guilty to disorderly conduct. You pay a $500 fine, and we forget about the assault on an officer nonsense. You sign this, and you're out of here in an hour. No jail." It was the classic trap, a way to clean the books, cover their liability, and validate the illegal arrest. If she signed, she would be admitting guilt. She would be giving them the victory. "I need a pen," Avery said. Dean's smile was triumphant. He thought he had won. He pulled a cheap plastic pen from his shirt pocket and clicked it. "See, I knew you were smart. Just a little misunderstanding." Avery took the pen. She held the paper firmly. Then, With one brutal stroke, she drew a large X across the entire legal document, the force of the pen tearing the cheap paper. She pushed it back to him. "I reject your offer," she said. The smile vanished from Dean's face. His face turned red with fury. He slammed both fists on the table, and the metal groaned in protest. "You stupid bitch!" he screamed, leaning so far over the table that his face was inches from hers. "Do you have any idea the trouble you're in? I'm trying to help you." "You're not helping me," Avery said, without flinching or leaning back. "You're trying to cover up your crimes. You committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You falsified an arrest report. You attempted to extort me. You are illegally detaining me. For every minute I sit in this chair, your future prison sentence increases by a month. You're digging a hole, Officer Dean, and you're already in over your head." He reached out and grabbed her chin with painful force, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. I am the law in this town. You are nothing. I can turn off the camera behind that mirror. I can make you fall down in your cell. Nobody is going to believe a Jane Doe with no ID and a bad attitude. They'll believe me. My identity is not the problem," Avery said, in a dangerously quiet voice. "The problem is your conduct, which, by the way, has been recorded since the moment you stopped me." Dean froze, dropping his hand from her chin. "What?" "My watch," Avery said, lifting her left wrist, still cuffed to the table. The elegant black tactical watch gleamed under the harsh light. It has a passive audio recorder. It uploads data to a secure, encrypted government cloud server via cellular connection every 60 seconds. It recorded your invented motorcycle rule. It recorded your attempt at extortion. It recorded the sound of your gun's safety coming off. And it is recording this conversation right now. Dean stared at the watch, pale. In his fury, he had taken her wallet and keys, but he had left the watch, assuming it was just jewelry. "Give me that," he stammered, fumbling for the clasp. "Take it off now." "Touching that device constitutes tampering with federal evidence," Avery warned, her voice as serious as a judge pronouncing sentence. "Moreover, it has a coercion mechanism. Any attempt to remove it by force will send a silent, high-priority distress signal directly to the Critical Incident Response Group at Quantico. Do you really want to explain to a team of heavily armed federal agents why you are assaulting a handcuffed prisoner at a table, officer?" Dean's hand hovered over the watch. He was trapped. Officer Miller rushed in, holding the large plastic bag that contained Avery's wallet and keys. "The wallet," Dean demanded in a trembling voice. "Check it again. Check every pocket." Miller's hands shook as he dumped the contents onto the table. Cash, credit cards, a gym membership, and another card hidden in a sleeve. It was not a driver's license. It was an official identification, white, with a gold microchip and a holographic Department of Justice seal. Next to the severe professional photograph of Special Agent Avery Lattimore. It read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Counterterrorism Division." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and Dean's ragged breathing. Miller looked at the ID card, then at Avery, his face pure terror. "Chad," he whispered. "Oh my God, Chad." Dean snatched the card, read it, looked at Avery, who sat there, still handcuffed. Watching him, the bully was gone. In his place was a terrified man who had just realized he had not merely beaten a stranger, he had poked a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick. "Duh, it's fake," Dean whispered, trying to convince himself. "It has to be fake. People buy these things online, stolen valor." "Then run it," Avery challenged him in a calm but firm voice. "Swipe the credentials through the NCIC database. But I warn you, the moment you query that number, it will trigger a mandatory alert at the Washington field office. It's a digital trap." Dean stared at the card. He stared at the 4 words that had just destroyed his life: Federal Bureau of Investigation. He looked at Avery, chained and bruised, yet somehow in complete control of the room. "Call the lieutenant," he told Miller, his throat dry. "Call him now." Miller practically fled the room. Dean was left alone with the woman he had threatened, beaten, and arrested. He looked at the ID in his trembling hand, then at the watch on her wrist, then at her cold, relentless eyes. "You're in a lot of trouble for impersonating a federal agent," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The threat was pathetic, a dying ember of his former arrogance. "And you, Officer Dean," Avery answered, leaning forward as far as the handcuffs would allow, "are about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between authority and power." The door of the interrogation room flew open, slamming against the wall. Lieutenant Garrett Vance strode in with determined steps, radiating an aura of cheap cologne and cheaper arrogance. I was a soft, heavy man, whose physique betrayed a career behind a desk rather than on the street. He was the king of this small, sordid castle, and his expression made it clear he was annoyed at being disturbed. He held Avery's FBI credentials between thumb and forefinger, as if they were a piece of trash. He looked at Avery, then at the ID, and let out a dry, dismissive laugh. "So this is her?" he said to Dean, completely ignoring Avery. "The big bad federal agent." He tossed the ID onto the metal table. It slid across the surface and stopped in front of Avery. The gesture was pure, calculated contempt. Vance was the source of the rot, the enabler who created monsters like Dean by protecting them. Avery saw it instantly. Dean was the rabid dog, but Vance was the owner who had unleashed him. In her professional judgment, Vance was far more dangerous. "That is my official identification, Lieutenant," Avery said in a serene, cold voice. "I suggest you treat it with the respect it deserves." Vance leaned forward, planting his palms on the table, looming over her. "Respect?" he asked with scorn. "For a fake ID? I've seen better forgeries at a college party." "Special agent." "Seriously? Couldn't you just say you were a cop? Had to go all the way to the top?" "It's authentic," Avery stated. "Check the holographic overlay. Check the federal watermark." "I don't need to check anything," Vance snapped, his eyes fixed on her chest with the same dismissive look Dean had used. "I know my district, and I know for a fact we don't have FBI agents, especially ones who look like you, riding around on $1,000 motorcycles causing trouble. Officer Dean tells me you were aggressive, that you assaulted him, that you resisted arrest. The video evidence will prove otherwise," Avery said. "What video?" Vance smiled, a thin, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes. "Officer Dean's body camera wasn't working. A known issue with these older models. Tragic, really. And your phone seems to have been damaged during your violent resistance. It won't turn on." I was lying without effort. It was a well-rehearsed script. The cover-up was in full swing. "And the patrol car camera? View obstructed by a tree," Vance said, without hesitation. "So it's your word against 2 of my best officers. And you're a woman with no verifiable address, a fake ID, and a clear attitude problem. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? Officer Miller?" Avery said, looking toward the open door where the rookie was hovering. "Is that your statement too, that I assaulted Officer Dean?" Vance's head snapped around. "Miller, get back to your desk. Dean and I have this under control." Miller looked from Avery's unyielding gaze to Vance's threatening one. He swallowed hard, shook his head slightly, and disappeared down the hallway. Another link in the chain of conspiracy was forged. "Here's what's going to happen," Vance said, turning his attention back to Avery. "We're adding impersonating a federal agent to your list of charges. That's a felony. You'll be held without bond until arraignment. By the time you get a public defender, this will all be locked down. I suggest you call Avery said. "Call the Washington field office of the FBI. The number is on the back of my credentials. Ask for Deputy Director Carl Michaels. He can verify my status in under a minute." "I'm not calling anyone," Vance said, raising his voice. He was enjoying this, the feeling of power over someone he perceived as an arrogant outsider. "You think you can come in here and play games? You picked the wrong precinct, girl. We do things our way here." "Lieutenant Vance," Avery said, leaning forward as far as the handcuffs allowed, "you are making a catastrophic error in judgment. If you continue with these false charges, if you continue to tamper with evidence, you will not be facing a local prosecutor. You will be facing the Department of Justice, and they do not make deals." Vance's face flushed an ugly, mottled red. "Get her out of my sight," he shouted at Dean. "Put her in isolation. No calls, no lawyer. I want her locked down until we figure out who she really is." "You are denying me my constitutional rights," Avery declared for the record. "I'm denying your fantasy," Vance shot back. "Dean, take her down. And be careful. We wouldn't want her to trip and fall on the way to her cell. That would generate too much paperwork." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Dean smiled, his confidence restored by his boss's support. "You got it, Lieutenant." He grabbed Avery's arm, unlocked the cuff from the table, only to twist her arm behind her back in a painful hammerlock. As he shoved her out of the interrogation room and back into the main hallway, a woman walked past, carrying a stack of files. She stopped. She saw Avery, her proud bearing despite the rough treatment. She saw Dean's aggression and Lieutenant Vance pocketing the white federal ID card with a mocking smile. "Lieutenant," the woman said, stepping into their path. She was in her 40s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her badge identified her as Detective Jenkins. "Sir, is that a personal ID card?" "Personal?" Vance paused. "It's fake, Jenkins. Mind your own business." Jenkins did not move. Her eyes were fixed on the pocket where the ID had disappeared. "Sir, I was a military police investigator in the Marine Corps for 8 years before I joined the department. I've seen thousands of federal IDs. That card, the way the light hits the gold chip, has a particular prismatic effect. Forgeries don't get that right." "I said it was fake, Detective." Vance's voice was sharp, drawing looks from all sides. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Jenkins looked at Avery. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Avery transmitted a silent plea, not for help, but for diligence. She gave Jenkins a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Run the number, Detective," Avery said in a quiet but firm voice. "The service number is on the back. Foxtrot." "Shut her up and put her in isolation," Vance shouted. Dean shoved Avery forward, breaking the eye contact. "Let's go." Detective Jenkins watched them disappear down the hallway toward the cells. Her stomach turned. She knew Vance was a bully. She knew Dean was a bully with a badge. But this woman did not behave like a criminal. She behaved like a commanding officer. "Jenkins," Vance snapped as he passed her on the way to his office. "Forget what you saw. It doesn't matter." "Yes, sir," Jenkins answered automatically. She turned and walked toward her desk in the detective squad room, but she did not sit down. She waited for Vance's office door to slam. She waited a full minute. Then she turned on her heel and walked quickly toward the record security room at the back of the precinct. Doubt had been planted in the corrupt soil of the 4th Precinct, and Detective Jenkins was about to water it with a query to a federal database. Detective Sarah Jenkins sat in the cold, humming silence of the precinct server room. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Disobeying a direct order from a lieutenant was a career-ending risk, but something in the prisoner's eyes resonated with Jenkins's military past. It was a look of absolute, unbreakable integrity. It was the look of someone who knew the rules better than the people trying to enforce them. Jenkins had seen that look on the faces of battle-hardened colonels, not common criminals. "Please don't let me be wrong," she murmured to herself as she logged into the terminal. She had access to the National Crime Information Center, NCI, the massive electronic repository of criminal records maintained by the FBI. She bypassed the local system, which she knew Vance could monitor, and went straight to the federal portal. She typed the name she had overheard, Lattimore, Avery. She hit enter. The system paused for a moment. Then the screen went black. For a heart-stopping instant, Jenkins thought she had crashed the server. But then the monitor came back to life. Not with the typical blue police interface, but with a blood-red banner across the top. Warning: classified file. For official use only. Top secret. Jenkins rolled her chair back from the screen. Beneath the banner, a Department of Justice seal spun slowly. Identity confirmed. Lattimore, Avery S. rank, Special Agent GS-14. Status: active. FBI Counterterrorism Division. Critical Incident Response Group. "Oh my God," Jenkins whispered, her heart pounding. GS-14. This was not a regular field agent. This was elite. This was the tip of the spear. This was the kind of agent whose existence was officially denied. Before she could even think about closing the window, a second text box appeared, flashing with an urgent, aggressive pulse. Unauthorized access attempt detected at Greenfield PD. IP address logged. Remote trace initiated. Surveillance protocol activated. The system had locked her out. It thought she was a hostile intruder. A chill ran down her spine. Surveillance protocol. It sounded like something out of a spy movie. She had to warn Vance. She was breaking the law. Miller grabbed her arm. "Where's the prisoner in the white shirt?" "They put her in isolation," he stammered. "Downstairs." "Why? What's wrong?" "She's real," Jenkins said in a low voice. "She's not just FBI, Miller. She's high level. I ran her name, and the entire federal system went into lockdown. Red alerts everywhere. Do you understand what that means? It means the full weight of the United States government is about to come down on this building. On us." Miller went pale. He leaned against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him. Dean pointed a gun at her. He whispered in horror. "I was there. I saw it." "We have to get her out right now," Jenkins said, leaving Miller drowning in panic. She ran to Lieutenant Vance's office and threw the door open without knocking. Vance was on the phone, laughing. "Yeah, so I told him, 'You're not my boss.'" He looked up, face contorted with anger at the interruption. "Jenkins, what the hell do you think you're—" "Sir, we have a code red situation," she interrupted, out of breath. "The prisoner is exactly who she says she is. I checked her credentials. The system flagged her as top secret. She's a counterterrorism agent with the FBI. We are currently illegally detaining a high-ranking federal agent." Vance stared at her and then burst out laughing. "You actually fell for it. Fake ID. Jenkins, you're more gullible than I thought. It's a computer glitch. Go back to your desk." "It's not a glitch," Jenkins insisted, raising her voice. "The terminal locked me out. A tracking alert was activated. They know we accessed the file, sir. This is a federal crime. We are committing it right now." "Don't you raise your voice at me, detective." Vance stood up, face purple with rage. "I am in charge here, and I say that woman is a fraud and a criminal, and she stays in that cell." At that exact moment, Vance's desktop computer flickered. The screensaver disappeared, replaced by a black screen with a single Department of Justice logo spinning in the center. Vance froze. "What did you do to my computer?" "I didn't do anything," Jenkins whispered. Then every phone in the precinct started ringing at once. Desk phones, dispatch lines, the fax machine. Personal cell phones in every officer's pocket. It was a deafening digital chaos, a symphony of incoming calls with no caller ID. Vance stared at his desk phone as if it were a snake. Slowly, he lifted the receiver. "Lieutenant Vance." There was no human voice on the other end, only a cold, synthesized robotic voice. "Location of the agent has been confirmed. You are in violation of federal law. Release the agent immediately. You have 60 seconds to comply before forced entry is authorized." 59:58. Vance slammed the phone down. "Ashen. It's a prank, a hack." "It's not a hack," Jenkins said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "It's a surveillance protocol. She must have activated a beacon. They're here. They're in our systems." The arrogance in Vance's eyes was finally replaced by pure animal terror. He looked at the window, then at Jenkins. "Go down," he whispered. "Talk to her. Find out what she wants." "What she wants?" Jenkins asked in disbelief. "Sir, what she wants is for us to open that cell door and beg for our lives." "Go!" Vance screamed, completely unhinged. "Stall her. Don't release her yet. I need to call the chief. I need to fix the paperwork. I need to think." "There's no time to think." Jenkins turned and ran out of the office, leaving Vance in a frenzy of panic. The phones kept ringing, an endless, maddening alarm announcing their doom. She grabbed Miller in the hallway. "Get the keys to the isolation cell, now." They clattered down the concrete stairs to the basement. The air was cold and damp. The sound of the phones faded, replaced by the luminous silence of the cells. They reached the isolation cell. The heavy steel door was locked tight. Jenkins's hands shook so badly she could barely get the key into the lock. The bolts clicked. She pulled the heavy door open. Light from the hallway flooded the completely dark cell. Special Agent Avery Lattimore was standing in the center of the room. She was not sitting. She was not curled in a corner. She was standing in a modified rest position facing the door, as if she had been waiting for them. She blinked once when the light hit her eyes. Her expression was unreadable. "Detective Jenkins," she said in a quiet voice. "You checked my credentials." It was not a question. It was a statement. "Yes, ma'am," Jenkins stammered, instinctively falling back on the honorifics from her military days. "I did. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize, Detective," Avery said, stepping out of the cell into the light. "You did your job. You upheld your oath. Now tell me, has the lieutenant already started destroying evidence?" Jenkins looked at Miller, who nodded sadly. "Vance told Dean to wipe the server room cameras and the dash cam recordings from the patrol car. They're in the IT room right now." Avery sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy, tampering with federal evidence. They just turned a fatal mistake into a 20-year prison sentence. She looked at Jenkins. "I need you to return my belongings, Detective, especially my phone. And then I need you to open the rear Sallyport doors." "Why, ma'am?" Jenkins asked. "You're free. You can walk out the front door." Avery looked at her tactical watch. The countdown that had appeared when she spoke the code black now read 30. "Because," she said with a grim, unyielding look, "the hostage rescue team doesn't knock. They prefer the back door." Inside the narrow, overheated IT room of the precinct, Officer Nathaniel Dean was in a frantic race against time. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes as he frantically clicked the mouse, trying to navigate the station's archaic computer system. Lieutenant Vance paced behind him like a caged animal, biting his nails. "Wipe it all," Vance hissed, his voice choked with panic. "The booking video, the car camera, everything from the last 3 hours. Format the hard drive. We'll say it was a power surge." "I'm trying, Lieutenant," Dean growled, fingers slipping on the keyboard. "The system is frozen. Something's blocking me from admin control." On the screen, a progress bar for the format command was stuck at 1%. Then the screen flickered, and a new window appeared. A black box with green text scrolling. Remote administrator. Access granted. FBI Cyber Division. All local commands locked. Data preservation protocol initiated. All files uploading to secure server. What the hell? Dean shouted. They hacked it. Someone's copying the files. Who? Vance screamed, grabbing the back of Dean's chair. It says FBI. They're taking everything. Unplug it, Vance shrieked, his face desperate. Kill the power, now! Dean dove under the desk, searching through a tangle of cables. He found the main power strip connected to the server rack and yanked it from the wall with all his strength. The room went dark. The hum of the servers died. Silence. It's over, Dean panted, sitting on the floor among the dust bunnies. No power. They can't upload what isn't there. Vance leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Okay. We stick to the story. A power surge fried the system. It's our word against hers. He believed he had cut the kill switch. He believed he had contained the damage. He was like a man with a bucket trying to stop a tidal wave. Thump, 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 thump. A deep, rhythmic, vibrating sound began to fill the air, more felt than heard. It grew louder and louder. What is that? Vance asked. It's a helicopter. They stumbled out of the dark IT room into the bullpen. The scene was chaos. Every computer was dark. Officers stood around confused and frightened. Sergeant O'Connell was shouting from the front desk that all the radios were dead. Vance ran to the front window and looked out. His mouth fell open. 15 meters above the parking lot, 2 MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters hovered, their matte black fuselages silhouetted against the blue sky. The roar of their rotors was deafening, throwing debris across the asphalt. On the ground, 3 massive black armored Chevrolet Suburbans had smashed through the precinct security gate and arranged themselves in a tactical formation in front of the building. The doors of the Suburbans flew open and a dozen men poured out. They were dressed head to toe in tuas in black tactical gear, faces hidden by helmets and protective goggles. They carried short-barreled carbines with terrifying efficiency and determination. Their patches did not say police. They said FBI hostage rescue team. "Lock the doors!" Vance screamed. His voice was lost in the roar of the helicopters. Dean, the glass entrance doors, and fumbled with the lock. He looked up and saw a massive HRT operator standing on the other side. The operator looked at the locked door, then at Dean, and simply stepped aside. Another operator stepped forward carrying a heavy hydraulic breaching tool. "FBI, open the door!" A voice boomed through a megaphone, cutting through the noise. Dean staggered backward. "You don't have a warrant!" he shouted pathetically. The operator with the breaching tool did not answer. He set it against the doorframe. There was a loud hiss. Boom! The entire doorframe, the lock, and a large section of the surrounding wall exploded inward in a rain of glass, metal, and plaster dust. The blast knocked Dean off his feet. "FBI, nobody move, hands up!" A wave of agents in black poured into the lobby, the laser sights of their weapons painting the chests of the stunned, terrified Greenfield officers. One by one, the local cops dropped their weapons and raised their hands. They had never faced a force so overwhelming, so disciplined. A tall, calm man in tactical uniform, with the yellow FBI flag on his chest, stepped through the ruined doorway. He was Special Agent in Charge Mark Grayson, commander of the HRT unit. He scanned the room without missing a thing. "Where is she?" Grayson's voice was low, but demanded immediate attention. "Where is Agent Lattimore?" Vance, covered in dust and trembling, stepped forward. "This is an outrage. You have no authority." 2 HRT operators cut him off. They grabbed him, slammed him against the wall, and handcuffed him before he could finish the sentence. We have a federal arrest warrant for this entire precinct for the kidnapping of a federal agent, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice," Grayson said coldly. "Your authority here ended exactly 10 minutes ago." "She's safe!" Detective Jenkins shouted from the hallway leading to the cells. She appeared with her hands raised, and Officer Miller cowering in fear behind her. "I have her. She's here." Grayson gestured, and a 4-man team moved immediately to secure the hallway, forming a protective diamond. From the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged. It was Avery. She was still wearing her riding pants and the slightly soiled white shirt. Her wrists were red and bruised from the handcuffs, but she walked with an undeniable aura of power and authority that made every federal agent present straighten a little. She stopped in the center of the devastated lobby. Grayson came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. "Agent Lattimore, HRT Alpha Team reporting. The scene is secure. We have the targets in custody." Every FBI agent present followed suit in synchronized movement. The silence was absolute. Avery looked at Grayson. She returned the salute. "At ease, Grayson." The mockery and arrogance were gone, replaced by the open-mouthed terror of men who had just understood the true nature of the fire they had been playing with. Avery walked over to Dean. She stood beside him, looking down at him. "You," Dean whimpered, staring at the woman he had mistreated and mocked. "You told me this town was yours," Avery said in a soft voice that still carried through the silent room. "Looks like you were wrong." The lobby of the 4th Precinct, once a gloomy, neglected space, was now the forward command post of a full-scale federal investigation. The air, thick with the acrid smell of the explosive breach, vibrated with the quiet, focused energy of elite professionals at work. FBI agents moved with discipline, tagging evidence and escorting the stunned Greenfield officers one by one for questioning. Avery stood calmly in the middle of the controlled chaos, while an HRT medic carefully cleaned a cut on her wrist where the handcuffs had broken the skin. "Should we take you to a hospital for a full evaluation, ma'am?" the medic advised. "I'm fine, Sergeant," Avery answered, her gaze fixed on Lieutenant Vance and Officer Dean, who were now sitting on the floor in flex cuffs, pale with shock. Special Agent in Charge Grayson approached her. "Cyber Division just reported in. They have everything. The suspect's attempt to kill the power was useless. The audio from your watch was already on the server, and the precinct data was mirrored to a DHS cloud from the moment they booked you. They have the complete, unedited video from the dash cam and the booking room." Vance heard this and let out a choked moan. He had not known about the cloud mirror. Avery walked over to him, her expression unreadable. "You assumed your corruption was contained within these 4 walls, Lieutenant. That is the mistake of every petty tyrant. You never imagined that the system you were part of was bigger and more powerful than your small, dirty corner." She turned to a young technical agent who was setting up a hardened laptop. "Sato, can you patch into the lobby monitor?" "Yes, ma'am," the agent answered. "Put the dashcam recording on the screen," Avery ordered. "I want everyone to see it." The large television on the wall that used to display wanted posters and community bake sale announcements flickered to life. The room went silent. Every agent, every remaining local officer turned to watch. The video began. It showed the serene, sunny street. It showed Avery stopping peacefully. It showed her calm, respectful demeanor. And then it showed Officer Dean, his aggressive body language, his shredding voice. It showed the invented rule, the illegal demand for money. And then it showed the moment he drew his weapon. A collective gasp went through the room. The local officers who had worked with Dean for years stared at him in disbelief. They knew he was a bully, but they had never imagined this. It was a raw, undeniable display of criminal misconduct. The video continued, showing him handcuffing Avery, who offered no resistance, shoving her, and delivering his venomous threats. Then Avery asked Sato to play the booking room video. The camera angle was high, capturing everything. It showed Dean and O'Connell mocking her, conspiring to falsify her address. It showed the illegal order for the strip search. It showed every lie, every violation in crisp, high definition. Finally, she asked them to play the audio from her watch, synchronized with the interrogation room video. The room listened in horror to Vance's cover-up, his threats, the dismissal of her credentials, and the order to bury her in isolation. When the recording ended, a dense, overwhelming silence filled the lobby. The evidence was absent. The conspiracy was laid bare. Avery stepped away from the screen and faced the assembled officers of the 4th Precinct. "This is not a defective body camera," she said, in an authoritative voice. "This is not an obstructed view. This is a systematic, documented pattern of corruption and abuse of power orchestrated by your commanding officer." She walked over to Dean. He refused to look at her, his eyes fixed on the floor, tears of self-pity rolling down his face. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "I swear, if I had known you were FBI." Avery crouched, bringing her face level with his. "That," she said in a low, dangerous whisper, "is the most damning confession you could make. Do you think my job title is what makes this wrong? Do you think if I had been an ordinary citizen, a nurse, a teacher, a student, would have been acceptable to threaten me, extort me, and mistreat me? You are not sorry for what you did, Dean. You are only sorry you did it to me." She stood up. "You do not respect the law. You only respect power. And you are about to spend the rest of your life learning what real power looks like from inside a cage." She turned to Grayson. "Colonel Jackson." "Ma'am." "These men are a disgrace to the uniform," Avery said. "Strip them." "Strip them?" Vance shrieked, his voice breaking. "Their badges," Avery ordered. "Their belts, their insignia. They have lost the right to wear a police uniform." 2 massive HRT operators stepped forward. They lifted Dean. One of them ripped the Velcro name patch from his uniform. Tear. The other unbuckled his duty belt and let it drop to the floor with a heavy clatter. Then one of them reached out and tore the metal badge from his shirt. Dean stood there, stripped of every symbol of his authority. He was no longer Officer Dean. He was just Chad, a trembling, pathetic criminal. They did the same to Vance, who groaned as they removed the lieutenant's bars from his collar. Just as the fallen officer's badges were being placed into an evidence bag, the shattered main doors were pushed aside. A man in an elegant tailored suit entered, followed by a group of stern-faced individuals in suits. He was the United States Attorney for the district. "Agent Lattimore," the attorney said, walking carefully over the debris. "We received the data stream from Cyber Command. My office has already drafted the federal indictments." "That was efficient, Counselor," Avery commented. "When the CIRG calls, we write fast," he answered. He looked at the 2 trembling, disgraced men. "Are these the defendants?" "Confirmed," Avery said. "Take them into federal custody," the U.S. Attorney ordered the marshals behind him. "They will be held at the Federal Detention Center. No bail." As Dean and Vance were dragged out of the precinct they once ran, the remaining Greenfield officers watched in stunned silence. Their world had been completely rewritten in less than an hour. Avery addressed them, her voice carrying through the lobby. "This precinct is now a federal crime scene. Every file, every arrest report, every citizen complaint from the last 5 years will be audited. If you were part of this cancer," she pointed to the empty space where Vance and Dean had stood, "we will find you. But if you are a good officer who was too afraid to speak up, now is your chance to be a witness. Your cooperation will be taken into account." She turned and saw Detective Jenkins standing against the wall, looking overwhelmed but determined. Detective, Avery said. Yes, ma'am. You are in charge, Avery stated. Jenkins blinked. Ma'am? Until the Department of Justice appoints an interim chief, you are the acting commander of this precinct. You were the only one here who demonstrated the integrity to uphold your oath. Avery looked at the U.S. attorney. Any problem with that, counselor? The U.S. attorney smiled. Acting Chief Jenkins. Sounds good. Jenkins straightened, a new authority settling on her shoulders. She looked at the chaos, and then at Avery. I won't let you down, ma'am. I know, Avery said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make a statement, and someone please find my Ducati. Weeks later, the Greenfield Community Gymnasium hummed with an electric, anxious energy. The cavernous space, normally home to high school basketball games, had been transformed into a town hall. The bleachers were packed with a cross-section of the city. Wealthy residents of Willow Creek sitting uncomfortably next to working-class families from the neighborhoods the 4th Precinct had terrorized for years. They were a community divided by class and race, but united tonight by a shared sense of betrayal and a desperate hope for justice. A podium stood on the stage, flanked by large projection screens and a row of tables occupied by serious-faced officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI. Exactly on time. The side door opened and the room fell silent. Special Agent Avery Lattimore walked onto the stage. She was not the woman in the torn white shirt. Tonight, she was the embodiment of federal authority. She wore a perfectly tailored dark navy suit, her FBI credentials pinned to the jacket. Her expression was serious. Her posture radiated a confidence that commanded the room. The only visible reminder of the incident was a faint, fading scar on her wrist. She stepped to the podium and surveyed the crowd, meeting every face. "Good evening," she began, her voice amplified by the microphone, clear and powerful. My name is Avery Lattimore. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 2 weeks ago, I was unlawfully arrested by officers of the Greenfield Police Department. You have seen the videos. You have read the headlines. Tonight, I am here to tell you that what happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was the symptom of a disease. She pressed a button on a remote. The screens behind her lit up. The version told by former Lieutenant Vance and former Officer Dean was that I was a criminal who resisted arrest. The dash cam video played again. The shocking click of the gun's safety echoed through the silent gymnasium. A collective gasp swept the crowd. The truth, Avery continued, as the video froze on Dean's face contorted with rage, is that Officer Dean saw a black woman on an expensive motorcycle in a neighborhood where he believed she did not belong. He saw an easy target for extortion, and when he met quiet, lawful resistance, he responded with illegal force that put a life in danger. The screen changed to a spreadsheet filled with names, dates, and numbers. This was not just bad policing. It was a criminal enterprise. We seized the precinct records. We found what they called the slush fund. Over the past several years, Officer Dean, with Lieutenant Vance's approval, conducted hundreds of illegal traffic stops, primarily targeting minority citizens. They seized more than $200,000 in cash without filing the proper paperwork. They called it asset forfeiture. It was armed robbery with a badge. A wave of angry murmurs rolled through the audience. A man stood up. They took $500 from my son, said it was drug money, and arrested him. He lost his scholarship. We have that file, sir, Avery said, searching the crowd for the man. And the FBI's Victim Services Division will contact you tomorrow. Every stolen dollar will be returned. Every unjustified charge will be expunged. A wave of applause erupted, a cathartic release of years of accumulated frustration and injustice. Avery raised her hand, and the room fell silent. The corruption did not stop there. We have evidence implicating several other officers, and the investigation has already reached City Hall. The crowd gasped again. This was a cancer that had spread to the very heart of their city's government. Detective Jenkins walked onto the stage to a wave of applause. She looked nervous, but determined in her new, impeccable uniform. "Thank you, Agent Lattimore," she said into the microphone. "We have a long road ahead to rebuild the trust that was broken. Effective immediately, every patrol car will be equipped with a new, tamper-proof camera system. We have implemented a zero-tolerance policy for racial discrimination, and we have opened a direct hotline to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice for any citizen complaint. We will be a transparent, accountable police force. I swear it." As Jenkins stepped back, Avery returned to the podium. One final matter. Earlier today, the attorneys for Nathaniel Dean and Garrett Vance approached the U.S. Attorney's Office offering a plea deal. They offered to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a sentence of probation with no prison time. A wave of boos and angry shouts filled the gymnasium. They claimed that losing their jobs was sufficient punishment, Avery said, holding up a hand. They claimed their actions were a momentary lapse. She leaned into the microphone. "A momentary lapse is forgetting to use a turn signal. Pointing a gun at an unarmed citizen because your ego is wounded is not a lapse. It is a fundamental betrayal of the oath to protect and serve. As the primary victim in this case, I was consulted by the Department of Justice," Avery announced, her voice resonating through the hall. "I have officially rejected their plea agreement. We will proceed to a full federal trial. We are not seeking probation. We are not seeking a moral scolding. We are seeking the maximum sentence possible under federal law. We are going to make an example of them," she declared, raising her voice with passion, "so that every corrupt officer in this country knows that the badge is not a shield, the Constitution is not a suggestion, and justice is not for sale." The room erupted in a standing ovation. For the first time, the divided community of Greenfield stood united, roaring their approval. Avery stepped away from the podium. Her work was nearly finished. She had not merely arrested 2 corrupt cops. She had armed a broken community with the one thing they had lost: hope. 6 months later, the solemn courtroom of the United States District Court, paneled in dark wood, remained silent, thick with expectation. The gallery was packed with journalists, citizens of Greenfield, and a formidable, silent row of off-duty FBI agents who had come to support their colleague. At the defense table, Nathaniel Dean was a shadow of his former self. He had lost weight, his skin was sallow, and his arrogant swagger had been replaced by a constant, nervous tremor in his hands. He wore a suit that no longer fit and stared at the polished surface of the table, unable to meet the jury's eyes. Beside him, former Lieutenant Garrett Vance looked even worse, a broken man who had aged a decade in half a year. In the front row of the gallery sat Avery Lattimore. She wore a simple black professional dress. Today, she was not there as a federal agent. She was there as the victim, the citizen whose rights had been violently violated. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out. Judge Evelyn Reed, a formidable woman with a reputation for being hard on official corruption, took the bench. "The jury has reached a verdict," she announced in a voice devoid of emotion. The foreman of the jury, a high school history teacher, held the verdict form. He cleared his throat. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law against the defendant Nathaniel Dean, the jury finds him guilty." A choked sob escaped Dean's lips. "On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice against the defendant Garrett Vance, the jury finds him guilty." And so it went. Guilty on all counts: falsification of records, wire fraud, extortion. The conviction was total. After dismissing the jury, Judge Reed proceeded directly to sentencing. Dean's attorney made a weak plea for mercy, which the judge cut short with a wave of her hand. I have seen the video of Mr. Dean pointing his service weapon at an unarmed woman during a routine traffic stop that he himself instigated with false pretenses, she said in a voice as cold as steel. I do not see a momentary lapse. I see an act of pure, unredeemable, drained tyranny. Then she turned her gaze to the gallery. Agent Lattimore, the prosecution has informed me that you wish to make a victim impact statement. You may approach. Avery rose and walked to the podium, her heels soft on the marble floor. She stopped a few feet from him. He finally looked up, eyes bloodshot and pleading. He saw no pity in her gaze. Your Honor, Avery began in a firm, clear voice. I am not here today to speak about bruises or fear. As a federal agent, I accepted the risk of physical harm as part of my job. She turned her head slightly, addressing Dean directly. I am here to speak about the deeper wound you inflicted. Not on me, but on the community you swore to protect. You wore a uniform and a badge for which generations of honorable men and women have shed blood, and you used them as a costume to disguise yourself as a petty dictator on a suburban street. You did not see a citizen, she continued. You saw a category, a woman, a person of color, someone you assumed you could dominate. Your crime was not only pointing a gun at me, it was believing you had the right to do so. Believing that your ego was more important than my life, and that your authority was a weapon to use rather than a trust to honor. I didn't know, Dean whispered, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know who you were. Exactly, Avery said, lowering her voice but with immense weight. You have proven my point. Do you believe a person's rights depend on their status? Do you believe justice is something granted only to those you deem worthy? That is the philosophy of a tyrant, Mr. Dean, not of an American police officer. She turned back to the judge. The uniform did not make him a monster. It only revealed the one already inside him. I ask the court to sentence him not only for the harm he caused me, but for the threat he represents to every citizen he would have encountered tomorrow. Avery stepped back. A deep silence filled the courtroom. Judge Reed nodded slowly. She looked at the two broken men at the defense table. Nathaniel Dean, she said, you have dishonored the badge and betrayed the public trust in the most egregious manner. I sentence you to 156 months in federal prison. 13 years. A gasp of astonishment swept the gallery. Garrett Vance, the judge continued, her voice like cracking ice. You were the supervisor who fostered this culture of corruption. For conspiracy and fraud, I sentence you to 180 months, 15 years. Vance collapsed onto the table, weeping, as the marshals handcuffed them and led them away. Dean paused and looked at Avery, his face bathed in tears and despair. I'm sorry, he shouted. Agent Lattimore, I'm so sorry. Avery held his gaze. She nodded slowly, acknowledging his words, but not absolving his acts. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, the sound resonating with the finality of justice. The story of Officer Nathaniel Dean serves as a chilling example of the insidious nature of unchecked authority and prejudice. His actions did not arise from nowhere. They were the predictable result of a character flaw, a deep insecurity, magnified by the power of a badge and nurtured in a precinct culture that tolerated and even encouraged such abuses. Dean's aggression was a desperate attempt to impose control in a world where he felt powerless. He saw Avery Lattimore not as a citizen, but as a symbol of everything that threatened his fragile sense of superiority. Her confidence, her race, her presence in an affluent space. He felt entitled to police and control. The Ducati, the white shirt, the refusal to be intimidated. Each was perceived as a challenge to his authority, and his only tool for reasserting it was fear. The tragedy is that the system under Lieutenant Vance was designed to protect him, not the public. His file should have been a sea of red flags. Instead, it was a testament to a culture of impunity. Could Avery have handled it differently? Of course. A less disciplined person might have fought back physically, a response that would likely have ended in tragedy and a muddy legal battle. She could have immediately declared her FBI status, using her own power to counter his. But her brilliance lay in her self-control. By choosing to absorb the abuse, by becoming the perfect victim, she forced the system to expose its own disease. If she had used her federal credentials to avoid the conflict, Dean would simply have found a different victim the next day, one without a direct line to quantify. By taking the blow, she ensured he would never again have the chance to hurt anyone. Her discipline was not passive. It was a strategic weapon. She did not merely win a confrontation. She dismantled a criminal organization by allowing it to drown in its own venom. The lesson for us is profound. Sometimes the most powerful move is to let the enemy defeat himself, giving him enough rope to build his own gallows. True strength does not always reside in the blow you strike, but in the one you have the discipline to endure for a greater purpose. And with that, our story ends. What do you think was Officer Dean's greatest mistake during the entire encounter? And do you believe Acting Chief Jenkins has what it takes to permanently reform the culture of the 4th Precinct? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light.